Yeah, and so at the heart of it, what I wanted to talk today about is building trust in AI specifically for finance, because the reality is that it's a question that most organizations are dealing with. I think at this point, most organizations have deployed some level of AI technology, whether that's Copilot or Gemini or more specific point solutions. The tools are being used at this point, but governance hasn't really kept up. And I'll talk about governance in two buckets because there's AI, basically AI tools governance, controlling what systems employees have access to, how you protect information across the organization. Again, that's AI tools governance. The other bucket that's really important to keep in mind is AI decision governance, how people are actually using those tools within the organization to create output, to generate decisions and reporting. That's the part that's critically important. And as I shared, I think most organizations have figured out how to govern the tools, but very few have figured out how to govern the decisions that those tools are shaping. And so
Mm.
the point that really drives that home is that as you look at AI usage right now, and this is some data from KPMG, but about 57% of employees hide their AI use from employers. Along with that, about 66% of employees acknowledge that they don't consistently evaluate the output and check it for accuracy. And then you add on top of that that about 56% of employees acknowledge that they made some AI related work mistakes. That is very significant. And I think the point that really highlights too is the impact because there's also some data from Ernst& Young that I shared recently that 64% of enterprise level organizations have already had at least one negative AI incident that cost them more than $1 million. And the average impact per AI incident is 4.4 million. And you can see why when you look at the way that employers are using these tools. And so, again, the question isn't so much about how much value the tools are generating, because clearly employees are finding value in using these tools. The bigger question is, can you trust the AI output reliably? And how should you validate information? And how do you scale the technology side without managing the guardrails on that? That part is critically important as well to get your arms around it. And so I think that's some data to set the landscape for where we're going with this. And for those of you that just joined, I'm just sharing a few insights. We'll get into the discussion in a little while, but I wanted to paint the picture for where we are right now. And the key thing about where AI is being used already is that it is shaping output and decisions and reporting inside organizations, but a lot of leaders don't necessarily know where. They focus on the solutions that they've deployed formally, whether that's a copilot or something else. But you also have to consider that AI is embedded in a lot of traditional tools now, like SAP and Oracle and Salesforce and Workday. And for those of you in the healthcare field, you think about something like Epic, which is increasingly adding AI into its core capability. On top of that, you also have the challenge of changing employee behavior. And so there's a data from Anagram Security recently that 6 in 10 employees admit to uploading sensitive company information into personal AI tools that they use at work. And so you look at that combined with this stat from Lenovo that about 70% of employees, whether they're using sanctioned tools or unsanctioned tools, so if you look at where this use is taking place, there's a real impact because employees are changing the way that they work, and it shows. And I'll just give you a practical example of that from the finance point of view. As you think about the month-end closing process, for example, traditionally you'd have a financial analyst that would look at something like variance analysis and reporting, and they would be going through Excel files, tab after tab after tab, identifying anomalies, and then doing the research on finding out exactly what happened for those discrepancies. So flash forward to today, where that same employee, that same analyst, is now uploading all the files, whether it's Excel or BI, into Copilot or into Gemini or some other tool, and they're allowing AI to identify where those anomalies are happening, where the variances are, and then also allowing it to generate the explanations for those variances as well. Now, there are three things I want to say about that. No, number one, I think it's a good use of AI. As you think about something like account reconciliation or variance analysis, things that are very time consuming from a human point of view, that's a great application for AI. It's a confined data set. It does those types of tasks very well. So I just want to make that point that it's a good application. But secondly, even though it's a good application, you still have to validate the output because what if it missed some anomalies? That could be, financial material, yeah, and you don't want to be surprised by something like that. So you still have to wait to check his work, even if it's a good use of the AI technology. And we'll talk about a little bit more what checking the work looks like, but I just wanted to make that point. And then the third thing that you have to consider as well is that, in the past, analysts were doing the research on exactly what happened and then providing the explanation. Are they still doing that? In other words, are the variance explanations that you're getting accurate, or does it simply reflect the statistically probable things from ChatGPT or Claude that are the most likely causes for that rather than the actual causes for that? You really have to know that. And so that's why getting visibility around where AI is being used and how it's shaping the outputs and decisions inside your organization is so important. So the second thing you have to do is build out the right approach to put those guardrails in place. And I just want to share, four things that you can do in terms of validating or building trust in AI. I'm going to talk about them really quickly, and then I'm going to share an example from a client that we work with to make the point how these things are integrated. The first thing that's very easy to do, running parallel processes from a human point of view. So basically, you run your traditional closing process, just using the variance analysis piece. You run your traditional process of having an analyst do that work alongside an AI agent or program doing that work as well, and then you just compare the two, and you can identify whether there are discrepancies or not. In a similar way, you can do a dual agent approach as well. So basically, you have one AI agent that performs the work, and you have a second AI agent that independently verifies the work as well. That's another solid approach, and then you can look at any discrepancies that are generated in that way. The third thing that you can look at doing is beyond just a policy, putting a playbook in place for how people make decisions and interact with the process, as well as being clear about what that workflow design actually looks like. Do you need to escalate, for example, in the variance analysis piece, variances over $10,000 get escalated for pure human review on exactly what happened, where things under 10,000 just kind of flow through naturally. And then the fourth area or fourth opportunity is on documentation and model and improvement, and being clear about what information you need to capture, where you need to flag AI generated output. Those are things that you can do. And it's a nice way to really wrap up and enable those other three areas of opportunity in terms of a governance layer. Now, how this looks in practice, we actually did this recently with a large tech services company here in the Charlotte area, and they actually used all four approaches. So they actually wanted to automate their account reconciliation process, their variance analysis process, and their management reporting process. And in doing so, leveraging AI, they were able to cut their close time from 14 days down to 7 days. But they had to do that safely. And so we worked with them on putting this approach in place where they actually had a human run the traditional process for the first 6 months while they created basically a checker agent to check the work of the agent that was actually doing the account reconciliation, variance analysis, and consolidated management reporting. And they ran that process together for 6 months just to validate that everything was working. And they did find issues every month for the first 3 or 4 months. They found things that they needed to correct as new situations appeared, new anomalies came forth, but they really developed a high level of confidence in the dual agent validation of the output that they were able to take going forward. On top of that, they also put in place a playbook and workflow design that complemented what they were trying to accomplish. So it included everything in terms of rules for escalation, as well as a post-close after action review where they could take the lessons learned from the month, the issues that were encountered from the validation effort, and then roll that back into improve the model. And then lastly, they documented all of that. So we created two things for them. We created a model issues log so that we could capture all the errors that were being generated. And then we also assisted them on building out the right level of documentation for their management reporting to identify where they had generated output included. So that's what that looks like in practice. And we can talk more about that as we get into the discussion. But I just wanted to share that. And then finally, before we open it up, the third thing I wanted to talk about is being clear about doing the diagnostic work up front before you build out a governance framework. The reality is that as you think about putting the right governance pieces in place, you've got to be clear about where your key risks are in your organization, what you're trying to accomplish from a strategy perspective, to prioritize the right mechanisms, the right approaches for your governance structure. You've got to build that out in the right way, and then you've got to engage the organization around it. And the diagnostic work really supports all three of those activities, including and maybe even particularly the change management effort that comes along with it. It's important that you enroll employees in the organization early in that process and you understand not only what they're doing with AI, but also how they're feeling about AI as well. That's part of building that trust piece, and it's an essential component that you engage them throughout the whole way. And again, if this was a conversation that you think might be beneficial for others in your organization, happy to share it as an internal discussion for your company. I think there's value often in getting that alignment on everybody kind of hearing the same thing or understanding the challenge together. And so happy to offer that as an opportunity. Second, if you are already a part of a AI initiative or you've got something launching in the next 90 days and you just want a resource to talk it through, happy to entertain that as well and give you some suggestions on how you move forward. And I say that from the perspective of, I host these sessions because it's always great to see everyone moving forward in a positive way with AI. Again, if we have an opportunity to do business together at some point, that's one thing. But separate from that, I still want you to feel that you've got a resource that you can call up, even if you just want to talk through some things and just get a better feel for what you need to do. So there's that. And then the third thing that I would say is that if you'd like to learn more about our capabilities and how we support our clients, happy to have a session and really walk you through all the different ways that we support and go into a little bit more depth about how we serve. Again, thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to talking with you soon.